right. Welcome everybody to our first office hours of 2023. Yay! So glad to hopefully we're getting some folks back from last year who participated in these and also recruiting some new folks. So invite your other garden friends and spread the word. If folks have questions, we want them to submit them to our new question portal and to join us live on sometimes the first Friday of the month to answer questions that are coming in from all across the state. So just want to start off by welcoming everybody here. Again, we've got a great panel of extension agents and specialists from across the state who are here to help us get some of these questions answered. And we also are using some new technology this year. So hopefully we're going to be able to share some pictures that are kind of going along with these questions that you all have been submitting. Hopefully those who use the question portal, that was an easy process for you, and you were able to upload some photos to go along with your questions. And we're going to try to share some of those today. Maybe not all of them, but we're definitely going to get some in each of the sections. So we were pretty heavy in ornamental horticulture questions for this session, and I can imagine that most of you know why, right? We had that flash freeze back, near Christmas that everybody's been talking about for so long, and it is just persisting. And so every day I feel like a new wave of clientele realize that half of their shrubs have died. So we're still getting lots of questions about that. So we're definitely going to touch on some of that this morning, but we are going to um, instead of having 4 different segments, we're just going to go with 3. So we're going to talk about ornamental landscape issues first, then we're going to move into a joint fruit and veggie session, and then we're going to cover lawns and weeds there at the end. So for those who may not have been with us before, my name is Celeste Scott, and I'm an extension agent in Madison County and part of our sustainable landscape work group. And we have members from all of our work groups, fruit and veggie work group here with us as well, just to help us get these questions answered. So thanks y'all for pitching in and being there to help out today. So we're just going to hop right in and get started with these ornamental horticulture questions. Okay, y'all. So again, lots of woody plant material that has been showing damage. Some of it was pretty evident right away, right? We had hollies, we had camellias, we had boxwoods, Indian hawthorns that are heavily used in residential landscapes. Their leaves turned brown and they fell off, right? So then we had these bare shrubs, and believe it or not, a lot of people did not even realize that anything had happened. If they're not really like gardeners, right, out in their landscapes every day, they're just, they weren't paying attention to that. But now, as time has gone by and other plants are starting to green up and our trees are leafing out, they are saying, what is going on? I have all of these bare stick shrubs in my landscape, and what is happening. So I want to share a picture with y'all real quick, just in case you hadn't noticed what's happening. This is a great example of something that people might be seeing in their landscapes, right? Lots of sticky plants hanging out. This particular picture, I believe she said that they were fringe trees. So she had some compact forms of fringe tree there that she had planted, and she was worried about them coming out. And so I'm going to say what we've been saying about nearly everything else, that let's be patient because things are starting to bud back out from that older wood. I'm certainly not saying that this plant, for example, is going to look great by the end of the season. That is not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there are parts of this plant that may still be alive. So if you pull it out now, or if you cut it down to the ground, you're never going to find out what parts of that plant might actually have been able to push out buds from like sleeping or dormant buds within that older wood. I've seen this on Nandina. I'm sure everybody's been seeing that in their landscape for sure. I have seen new growth happening at the base of some boxwoods, happening at the base of Laura pedalums. That's another one that I've been getting a lot of questions about. So there are signs of regrowth. So, just be vigilant, and in another few weeks, I think it's going to be much more evident which portions of the plant are not going to leaf back out. And it's going to give you a clearer line for where you can do your pruning, right? Where you can prune out that older dead plant material and let what's left try to revive itself. Does that make sense? Taylor, Lee, anybody else that's on here? Do y'all want to add any other final touches?
Yeah, that's great, Celeste. So one other one I've seen that's had a really good rebound is Acubas as well. You're probably seeing the same. I've not seen much come back on Camellia, Indian Hawthorn, or some of our laurels, at least here in the east side of the state. So
Agreed on the west side. I should have pointed that out, folks. I'm in West Tennessee, so we might be a week or a week ahead of some people.
That's right. And I was kind of surprised on the Acubas because it's really not coming out of the stems, it's coming out of the crown of the plant. So it may be a complete cull of that plant, cut it down to the base and let that new root system take over and take back the plant in time. So I did look through kind of our question list, Celeste, and I did see one on green giant arborvitae, which not necessarily a cold damage question, but it was a question about kind of areas or portions of the plant that had either dead branches or empty spots. And unfortunately for this person that had made the comment, they said that, unfortunately, it was like right at eye level at the lower portion of the plant on these green giant arborvitaes. And yeah, there's a good image of it. And, they were asking, what can we do to stimulate new growth in this area? Is it fertilizer or is it pruning? And, how do we fix this? And the short answer is there's not a whole lot we can do in a situation like this with an evergreen. Remember that, over time, of course, arborvitaes, particularly the green giant cultivar, they want full sun all day long. I mean, 6 minimum hours, 8 ideally. So I would look at the site first. I do see kind of in the foreground of the photo you have up here, of course, that looks to be a crepe myrtle or some other tree. So I'm sure that is casting some shade. But, what I suspect is the situation here is not necessarily a disease. It's just from an overshading effect. And certainly that's more common if we do a monoculture or a whole line of individual trees, one after the next. And as that canopy matures, unfortunately, it does cast shade on the lower portions of those plants. And over time, they'll die out. So how do we fix it? First thing I would say is not really a fertilizer. I wouldn't suggest that necessarily unless there was a true deficiency. But as far as pruning, I would do that. I would prune out dead limbs, encourage a little bit of greater sunlight penetration into that canopy. And over time, the neighboring limbs are going to kind of help to fill the voids, if that makes sense. But look at the site as a whole, see where your shade is, and see if that kind of follows a theme where maybe behind another tree, we do have that shade being cast.
The two things I were going to mention that I've seen the most damage from, but still about 80% of what I've seen are coming back are the laurels. That was probably the number one shrub we had questions about here. And so majority of what I've seen are coming back. But Japanese cryptomeria is one that has been, most of what I've seen is not looking so hot.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. So at first, it was looking like here in West Tennessee that maybe it was only the outer 3, 4, 5 inches and that the inside was protected. But as time has gone along, that browning has just gotten worse and worse. And so, I hate that for our sweet Labosa nanas that we have so many of. That's just a sad story for them, but for sure. Let's see, we had a few other comments here. Camiacyparis. What about, have y'all had a lot of questions about Leland cypress? I know we always have questions about Leland cypress, but usually it's because of Ceridium canker or another related disease. But unfortunately, I feel like, literally every one of them that I've seen is brown, and I don't think they're that was the last nail in their coffin. And hopefully we won't have a lot of we won't come back in and replace those with more Lelands, right? So this actually
Well,
might be a move in a better direction for
maybe
everybody.
so.
Yeah,
Well,
let's just,
Costco has them on sale now, so I've been seeing
oh,
people loading up their carts with them.
oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. Oh
Yeah,
my
it
goodness.
seems like this time every year Costco runs a sale on Leland cypress for some reason, and people just load up their carts with them. But yes, Celeste, I think the Leland cypress seems like that kind of slow death as well. It wasn't immediate, but they had kind of slowly been bit back, especially that last freeze we had. Did an extra number on anything that was trying to leaf out early.
Good point. So what about azaleas? So I know that we had azaleas that lost every single leaf, but they were on track to have a pretty impressive bloom still, even without the leaves. They went ahead and set their bloom buds, but then we had a freeze, that same freeze that got a lot of our fruit crops that we're going to talk more about here in a little bit, and decimated what bloom we might have had. And so that was discouraging, right? We had kind of recovered from the initial pain of all the plants losing their leaves, but had hope for a bloom and resprouting, and then we got nailed again. So, but
it messed up those Easter pictures. We always take Easter pictures in front of the azaleas, and we took Easter pictures in front of dead shrubs this year.
Exactly. And now those same shrubs are pushing out new leaves from those nodes. So we're seeing a lot of recovery on azaleas. So don't get crazy with your cutters and your pruners on your azaleas yet. Because like I said, a few more weeks and I think it's going to be a lot more evident where we need to make pruning cuts to remove dead plant material. Good deal. Were there any other questions that y'all wanted to talk about that were in the question portal in the ornamental section?
There was one on there, I believe, about Yoshino cherries as well. One was blossoming really well, and the other just didn't seem to have the same amount of vigor. It's hard and it's dependent on every site to, answer why a tree may be in decline. There could be any number of factors. I mean, it could be soil related, it could be planting depth, there could be a pest or an issue with one tree, or it may just be transplant shock. Remember, our plant material is not always going to be perfectly symmetrical. When we take it from where it's growing naturally, we ball and burlap it, we move it to a nursery, and then we take it to our landscape. So symmetry is sometimes hard to find. So don't necessarily expect two trees to thrive at the same rate. But Celeste, there was one thing that caught my eye, and that was potentially a bacterial canker. And a canker is basically an area of swollen or sunken tissue that often exists on the trunks or the branches of cherry. It's common here in the Southeast. And a lot of times on those canker areas, we often see gummosis form, which is kind of that amber liquid, the sap that oozes from those injuries. And that can certainly be an indicator of stress. But unfortunately, with a bacterial canker, if that is truly what this winds up being, yeah, that's the one, Celeste. And the cankers, unfortunately, you can't prune a canker out once it actually invades the trunk tissue. So, general recommendation is to prune 3 or 4 inches past your canker. But you can't do that once it invades the trunk. So what would I do? I wouldn't pull the tree out of the ground, but I would focus on getting that tree vigor back up just as quickly as I could. So, what that means is basically keep the tree healthy. So manage pests, limit the amount of pruning that you do this year of any live foliage. Again, look for those girdling roots, check your planting depth, and apply water if we do wind up with a situation where we have periods of drought. So,
hey, Lee, while we're on trees, we actually had one come into the Q&A box that I'll toss you.
Okay.
And it is from someone who says that they have lost a couple red buds in a dogwood tree this spring. What would be your thoughts on some of those, kind of native, pretty hardy plants that may seem to be coming out? Slow.
Yeah, I would almost want to expand. Are they new plantings? And I know you don't know that question necessarily, Natalie,
Yeah.
but are they new plantings or are they old established plantings? That would be my first. If it's a new planting, I would start with cultural situations. So look at the planting depth, make sure there's no injuries to that bark. If they're a much older specimen,
Yeah, they're older.
they're
She's on
older.
it. Yeah,
Awesome.
giving
She's
us
on it.
information
Okay, so
right
they're
now. Yeah.
older trees now, and they're truly dead. That would be interesting. So trees don't die overnight. They die as a culmination of various factors that add stress to that plant, and then they lose their vigor and they slowly succumb to that. Dogwoods, it varies. There could be something like a dogwood borer in the main trunk that would be pretty obvious. If you don't see that, we also have dogwood anthracnose, which could be an issue as well. But usually those don't, again, kill a tree overnight. With the red buds, I'm a little bit torn on that one too. If it's a mature specimen, I would ask, is it more dieback, or is it truly the whole plant has just outright died? And, for an established landscape tree to die overnight is pretty rare. And I know I kind of beat around the bush there, Natalie. I mean, there's any
Yeah.
factors that
No,
could
I mean,
kill a
that's
tree.
kind of what I was thinking,
but-
that in many ways we may be looking at a culmination of events. I mean, I can't, of course,
Of
speak for
course.
everybody, but like my redbuds, my dogwoods, I mean, those trees would have been very dormant when we had that stretch. So yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Natalie. So most of our deciduous trees were actually well acclimated. They were able to tolerate that drop in temperature. But what I am seeing now, Natalie, is a problem, and that's those freeze cracks. As spring temperatures begin to warm up, sap begins to flow. We still get cold evening temperatures. And I have a wonderful photo. I should have shared it with you all first, but we're starting to see 2 and 3 foot frost cracks appear in the trunks, where that bark is literally splitting open an inch and a half. And in some cases, at least the ones I've seen here in East Tennessee, the cracks almost going through on both sides of the tree. And as a result of that, of course, we know that tree will be slow to compartmentalize that area. Secondary fungi are going to invade it, and the prognosis is not great if it's a really large crack. So keep an eye out for frost cracks on your deciduous trees.
Hey, Nat,
Awesome.
I would add one thing in there too. When I see older trees that are of multiple species dying in an area, a lot of times I think about successional growth of that. You'll typically see that more with hardwood trees, and you'll see a larger environment. And a lot of times it was probably driven by drought stress or some other environmental factor. And those older trees being a very similar age, just going through successional death.
Yep, great point, Greg. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Wow.
Greg, that could fall into the site selection too, because a lot of times we'll see those dogwoods planted in full sun, and I know that's originally what that person had asked. It's it's an older tree, maybe are the roots still alive? And at that point, we've seen decay over a period of time. Maybe there are those frost cracks that are occurring, and maybe that's when we decide, hey, let's maybe put in something that's more suitable for that site if it is full sun. Given that our native dogwoods prefer to be a little bit on the under canopy of that, and kind of deal there. So
I want to kind of, before we have to swap over to our next, to the fruit and veggie session, I do want to address one photo that we had sent into the question portal about leaf spotting on magnolias. And so I thought this would be something good for us to talk about right now, because, as we get later into spring, I always get lots of questions at the extension office about southern magnolias shedding their leaves. And so everyone is always concerned that they have a disease. Now, just general shedding of older leaves is normal. But if you are having something like this, where you're seeing spotting on your newer foliage, right? Like the tips of the limbs where you have these rosette arrangement of leaves, that's your newer growth. If we're seeing leaf spotting on those newer leaves, that is generally an indication that you have most likely a fungal infection, leaf spot type disease on those leaves. However, if it's a mature tree, we're not usually super concerned about that. So that goes back to those perfect storms with the environmental situations. We have had quite a bit of rain. Is anyone wet? We've had quite a bit of rain this spring. Also kind of prolonged periods of cooler weather, which is conducive for a lot of these fungal leaf spot diseases. So you are going to have these leaves may indeed fall off, shed, right? And we want to try to clean those up. We don't want to let those overwinter, because then that's just, more spores present in the environment that could exacerbate the problem, as we go on. So if you know that you're having leaf spotting, don't be too concerned about trying to treat it or do anything, to prevent it, because it's just going to happen when those environmental conditions are conducive for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's just like with our hydrangeas, we get calls every year about leaf spot on hydrangeas. And some of those like Cercospora, Intimasporium, and all those like leaf spots, more aesthetically damaging than they are going to kill your plant. So you kind of have to weigh like, am I okay with a few spots and not have to worry about controlling? Because I know it's not going to be extremely detrimental to that plant. It'll drop those leaves, put new ones on, and I don't have to worry about it. And so it's kind of that thought process of few spots, it's okay. Like you said, a mature tree. I mean, if you got a 40, 80 foot tall magnolia, think about trying to treat for that fungal infection through that whole tree. It doesn't really seem as feasible as just, letting those leaves drop and put new ones on. And
So
of course,
true.
sanitation.
So true. Awesome. Okay, well, that wraps up our time for ornamentals this morning. I hope that we've answered a lot of your most important burning questions that you have. And even if we didn't feature them live this morning, we are going to try to get all those questions that were submitted in the portal answered. And we're going to send that stuff out to you all here in the very near future.